the Prime Minister of Japan, a guy by the name of Yoshida Shigeru, here pictured, said the Korean War was a gift from the gods. Can you imagine? This is the introduction to part 3, the series on Dokdo. Here we'll look at the Korean War and how Japan profited from the Korean War. And then I have a solution to the Dokdo controversy, and it's also a solution to the animosity between Korea and Japan. So enjoy. The Korean War, as far as Japan was concerned, was a great economic boon. After the war, the United States poured a lot of aid into Japan to become a good ally, friend of Japan in the new post-World War II world. And Japan started to flourish and the economy started to grow again. But it sort of hit a stall after 5 years, from 45 to 50. And the communist, socialist, labor groups were starting to make issues in Japan until the Korean War broke out, which gave Japan a tremendous boost to its economy. This happened later with Vietnam and the Korean economy as well. But that's not the story today. The Japanese economy was saved by the economic aid, natural trade that happened in Japan, because the United States Army, to buy and get food and other things for the soldiers, they could get them out of Japan more easily than shipping them all the way from the United States in some cases. So what happens? The Prime Minister of Japan, a guy by the name of Yoshida Shigeru, here pictured, said the Korean War was a gift from the gods. Can you imagine saying that a war was a gift to their economy? To say he profited, that he's a war profiteer, and sort of hang your head. Yeah, we took advantage of the Korean War. It helped our economy. Yeah, you can say that. But to say it was a gift from the gods is just callous and heartless. And Yoshida Shigeru is known as one of the greater villains in Korean history. He was not one of the war criminals. He had been active before before the end of World War II, of course. But there were certain Japanese officials who, if they had been German officials, would have been hauled before the trials in Nuremberg and would have been executed or incarcerated. But the Americans went soft on the Japanese, wanting to build a positive relation with Japan after the war. And largely that was successful as far as Japan and America is concerned. But the byproduct, the victim in this, was Korea. And after the war, the Japanese have refused to recognize their war crimes, the worst of which was the comfort women, the kidnapping and forcing and trickery of getting young women to go serve in brothels at the front lines all over Asia. These women were forced to serve in these brothels, and for which the Japanese apologized, and then they unapologized. A false apology. They gave some money, and then they later on said, well, they were all prostitutes, weren't they? The comfort woman issue is still unresolved. This picture here is of one of the surviving comfort women. There are only about 15 left. I think maybe 12 is what I heard recently. Here's a comfort woman holding the hand of the statue of the comfort woman that's been copied and replicated all over the world. This original statue is in front of the Japanese embassy where it sits. And every Wednesday, surviving comfort women meet and have a minor protest where they wave placards and say Japan should apologize. Well, the comfort women were forced into prostitution. I personally know a woman who worked for us as a maid when I was in Korea in the 90s, late 80s, who said that she was moved to her uncle's house in China because her uncle was an officer in the Japanese army. This is before the end of World War II. She was moved to live with her uncle because she could be safe there. Whereas if she stayed in South Korea, there was fear she would be picked up off the streets, which is what happened. The Japanese needed women for these comfort stations. And the Japanese will apologize about it one day, and then the next day they say, well, they were contracted employees, they volunteered, they were paid, they wanted to do this. And a Harvard law professor who was paid by the Japanese wrote an article about this, and the Japanese bring it out again and say, see, they weren't kidnapped, they were paid prostitutes. And some Japanese say, well, we apologized, didn't we? That's the end of it. But no, an apology is not a one-time event. An apology is a meaningful, permanent attitude of we did the wrong thing and we're sorry. And to go back and forth to apologize and unapologize just doesn't make it. It's something that some Japanese, right-wing, conservative, nationalistic Japanese say they're concerned about the image of Japan. They don't want to admit to war crimes because it will damage the image of Japan. This unrepentant attitude on the part of the Japanese concerning World War II is unlike Germany. Germany has monuments all over. This horrific thing took place, this horrific. The Nazis are terrible. And you can't fly a swastika flag in Germany, you'll be arrested or fined. But in Japan, you can put up the rising sun flag and it's no big deal. What is the way out of this problem? Well, I'm going to suggest something very radical, and a lot of people are not going to agree with this, but I see it as the only way out. And that would be for Japan to recognize Dokdo, for Japan to give up any claim on Takashima and say, for the sake of peace in the world, for the sake of a good relationship between Japan and Korea, and as an apology, as a symbolic apology, we surrender any claim to the island of Dokdo and we recognize Korea's claim. To do so would be for Japan to finally turn its back on its colonial history and not try to hold on to it, not to try to hold on to their image. It would show Japan to be a humane and trustworthy nation. The problem is, to be realistic, that they would have to do the same with Russia and China, I suppose. Maybe they could surrender the Korean fight without surrendering the Russian fight and the Chinese fight, but they'd be smart to give up all three of these fights because they're all very, very weak claims that make Japan look like a bully, trying to hold on to the last vestige of some imperial power that they had years ago. What are the chances of Japan doing this? Well, let me suggest a couple of things. In the London Olympics in 2012, the Korean team and the Japanese team lost in the semifinal round, and they were playing for the bronze medal. And Korea defeated Japan in this soccer match and claimed the bronze medal. As they were celebrating and running around, you know, the soccer player, they pull their shirt off and they run around. And here's a guy by the name of Park Jong-woo, who, as he's running around, someone hands him this thing that says, Dokdo is our land. Dokdo na nuri tang. And he's got a flag in one hand. Somebody handed him the flag. He didn't play with the flag in his hand. Somebody hands him this flag. Someone hands him this sign and he runs around and yay, yahoo, we defeated Japan. Well, he was denied his gold medal. He was the only one on the team that was not given his gold medal at the medal ceremony. There's a happy ending to the story. He apologized. He said, in the exuberance of the moment, I didn't plan this thing. It was not my intention. And in the Olympics, you can't have any political statements. He says, I wasn't thinking politics. I was just thinking, happy to celebrate the victory. And he apologized, and later he was given the medal. About 8 months later, he flew to Olympic headquarters in Bern, Switzerland, and was given his bronze medal. There's a happy ending to this story, a happy ending of apology and moving forward, which brings me back to the murder of Empress Myeongsan. We've talked about her just a few moments ago, this horrific thing where a band of Japanese samurai with samurai swords. She was filled with a sword. They had guns, of course, but she's filled with a sword. And this samurai group killed this woman, and we know who those samurai were. We know their names. The interesting thing was, this is a report from UPI in 2005. 2 descendants of the assassins who killed the Korean Empress in 1895 traveled to Seoul and bowed down in front of her tomb and apologized for what their grandfathers had done. Now, this is an apology, and it doesn't bring her back to life, but it's a huge step forward in saying we did the wrong thing and we apologize. So my argument is there's hope for an apology. There's hope for a way forward, and Japan has to take the step. Korea can't apologize to Japan for all the awful things Japan has done, but Japan can say, as a symbol of our apology for all the awful things we've done in Korea, the colonial occupation, the Hideyoshi invasion, for all these things, in the hope of a better world, we want to surrender any claim to Dokdo. That's my hope. And in Japan, there's a chance for this to happen because Japan is so conservative and right-wing right now because the right-wing and the conservatives are in control. But if the more liberal faction, more open-minded Japanese, many of whom I know who say they've done the bad things in Korea, and if that group comes in and says, hey, as a symbol of world peace and getting along with our neighbor, we, Japan, want to surrender any claim to Dokdo Island. So Dokdo is more than 2 rocky islands in the East Sea. It's a symbol of horrific Japanese violence and oppression against the Koreans. And one way to solve this issue, to move forward, would be for Japan to apologize and recognize the sovereignty of Korea over Dokdo Island. That's my point of view. Let me know if you agree or disagree, and we'll see you later. Thank you. Goodbye.